Here is a device in front of you that gives you a sense of déjà vu from the very first moment. It looks strikingly similar to the Apollo program Lunar module, the very one from which Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar dust and entered history. The design is recognizable, the general idea is clear, but what about this green color? Why the experimental paint? Protection from something? Or is this actually a sign of a completely different story, one that they preferred not to show? This device never had anything to do with the American Space Agency. This is a hidden, almost erased page of the Soviet Space Chronicle, about which there is not a hint in official documents or encyclopedias. The top-secret lunar spacecraft, which allowed the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to come dangerously close to victory in the space race, was launched beyond the atmosphere 3 times. Its mission was much more ambitious than simply landing one person on the surface of the moon. And all of this happened in complete silence. No official announcements, no publications, not a single photograph available to the public. The secret was kept for decades. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed did documents slowly start to surface from the most secret archives. And some of them send chills down your spine. Abandoned Soviet modules covered with lunar soil, something sinister recorded by microphones right on Venus, and it sounds like this. What exactly were the plans that were supposed to guarantee the Soviet Union's unquestioned leadership in space? And why was the triumph so agonizingly close, yet never happened? The idea of settling on other planets was not just an empty fantasy. The archival materials leave no room for doubt. They really were planning to colonize other worlds. In 1961, a film called Planet of Storms was released, a vivid science fiction movie where Soviet explorers walk on Venus, dive into its waters, and discover a new world. The audience was thrilled. The theaters gave standing ovations. Of course, it's just a movie, but here's the catch. By that time, the line between fiction and reality had almost disappeared. Scientific ideas about Venus back then were still full of hope. Telescopes could only see a thick layer of dense clouds, made mostly of carbon dioxide. Under this cover, as many experts believed, there could very well be vast warm oceans, something like a giant carbonated reservoir. While people in movie theaters were worrying about the heroes on screen, real Soviet rockets had already secretly launched toward that very Venus. On February 4, 1961, the first fully classified launch took place. The world's first space probe, created specifically to study Venus. It failed to enter an interplanetary trajectory. The engines of the second stage let it down. It was certainly a failure. However, the official version was extremely calm. Tests of a heavy satellite were being conducted. No mention of Venus, not a hint of failure. Exactly a week later, the second launch took place, and this time, everything went according to plan. It was this mission that was later called the first interplanetary mission in human history. Venera 1 passed by the planet at a distance in May 1961. Officially, there was no information. The antennas overheated and failed. Unofficially, we can only guess. Next came Venera 2 and Venera 3. One probe is completely silent, while the other becomes the first device in the world to enter the atmosphere of another planet. And again, complete silence, overheating, loss of all data. But the program doesn't stop. The dream is still alive. The red flag was meant to one day fly over an alien planet. 1968, Venera 4 official report. A lot of valuable data was obtained. However, the Americans were watching closely. The Mariner 5 probe recorded that the descent module did not begin breaking. It simply burned up in the upper layers of the atmosphere. It was then that the truth was revealed in all its harshness. 97% of Venus's atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and the pressure at the surface is dozens of times higher than on Earth. What seemed like paradise turned out to be an acidic, fiery hell. The new Venera 5 and Venera 6 probes were equipped with the strongest possible capsules. They hoped to reach the surface, but in May 1969, the instruments began to show insane readings: 320 degrees Celsius, 26 atmospheres, clouds of concentrated sulfuric acid. Both descent modules perished at an altitude of about 20 kilometers. The readings of the two independent probes matched the conditions on Venus with terrifying accuracy, leaving no doubt. Venus shattered all illusions completely, but the desire to prove superiority does not disappear so easily. While Venus was scorching hopes, attention shifted to the Moon. It turned out to be a much more realistic target, and more importantly, symbolically much more significant. September 1959. The Luna 2 probe reaches the surface of Earth's satellite. This was already the 6th attempt. The previous 5 had ended in failure and were carefully hidden from prying eyes. The Soviet leadership openly makes it clear: manned expeditions are ahead. Permanent bases are ahead. The scientists of that time begin to feel real anxiety. Project Horizon is a full-fledged military station on the Moon, 150 years of launches, $6 billion worth of technology that did not yet exist at that time. National Aeronautics and Space Administration engineers quickly came to the conclusion that this was impossible. In 1962, John Kennedy announced a more modest and realistic goal: to send a man to the Moon in the coming years. A bitter irony of fate. At that time, the Soviet Union didn't even have an approved full-scale lunar program. The development of a permanent base was entrusted to Vladimir Barman. His concept was both simple and revolutionary: to hide everything under the surface. Lunar regolith is the best natural shield against radiation and micrometeorites. This very principle is actively being discussed now for the first Martian settlements underground: living quarters, greenhouses with artificial lighting, a kitchen unit, a place for physical exercise, and fully equipped scientific laboratories. The nuclear reactor is placed on the surface to minimize risks. The base received the unofficial name Barmingrad, a city named after its creator. It has between 5 and 13 permanent residents. Supplies are delivered by regular flights of the super heavy N-1 rocket. A real lunar city, but in July 1969, the Americans were ahead of everyone. Sergei Korolev had already passed away several years ago. The N-1 rocket failed in all 4 of its test launches. The project was doomed. Venus decided to strike back. In 1970, Venera 7 was launched. The capsule, made of titanium and special ceramics, was designed to withstand up to 180 atmospheres. The parachute couldn't hold and melted. The probe fell uncontrollably, and yet it survived and operated for 25 minutes. On the surface of another planet, 91 atmospheres, 476 degrees Celsius. Hell acquired specific parameters. 1976, Venera 9 and Venera 10 transmit the first photographs in history of the surface of an alien world. Rocks, a monochrome nightmare, but it's a breakthrough. 1983, Venera 13 and Venera 14. Now there are color images and an audio recording. Listen closely. This is how the surface of hell breathes and crackles. A low hum of wind, occasional electric flashes in the acidic clouds. At the same time, there was another, even more secret line of work, the Almaz series of orbital stations. In official documents, they were scientific laboratories, but in reality, they were military platforms. In 1975, one of them fired a 14.5 mm automatic cannon right in orbit. Later, a working prototype of a laser pistol appeared, a weapon capable of disabling an enemy satellite's optics without the need to go into open space. Space became an arena for possible combat, but the Soviet Union couldn't keep up the pace. At the beginning of 2026, National Aeronautics and Space Administration is actively promoting the Artemis program. The return of humans to the moon is expected in the coming years. Venus is also back on the agenda, and several new missions are already in development and remain ongoing. One question remains that continues to trouble us. What if one day, among the silent lunar craters or the scorching, poisonous plains of Venus, we come across what remains of the most secret Soviet undertakings? The wreckage of modules, traces of devices, what was supposed to be the beginning of a new era? Who or what will we find there half a century later?